something that we have to do. There'll always be a little short-term interruption. I don't think it's going to be big, but the countries and companies that have been ripping us aren't particularly happy with what I'm doing. But the United States will be very happy. And, you know, our farmers are going to be very happy. And again, there'll be disruption.
Significant developing news this afternoon, just days after slapping 25% tariffs on almost all Canadian imports. The U.S., the White House, in fact, is pressing pause, giving Canada a reprieve until April 2nd for products covered by the USMCA. President Trump's start dates for so-called reciprocal tariffs on the whole world. Canada's first $30 billion worth of counter tariffs are already in effect. Finance Minister Dominic LeBlanc posting to social media moments ago this response to the Trump pause. Canada will not proceed, he writes, with the second wave of tariffs on $125 billion of U.S. products until April 2nd, while we continue to work for the removal of all tariffs. Before Dominic LeBlanc's tweet came out, but just as the Trump announcement was being made, I spoke with Industry Minister Francois-Philippe Champagne. Hi, Minister Champagne. Good to have you back on the show. Thank you for making the time.
Thank you for having me. It's one of those days, you know?
Yeah, one of those days, one of those weeks. And just to be totally transparent, you know, we have not read the executive order. I know that you have not read the executive order. So all we know is essentially that the decision to offer a reprieve where these specific tariffs are concerned under the USMCA or for products that fall under the USMCA for 30 days. Can you let me know what the government's thinking is as far as what that means for Canada's own response, and in particular the counter tariffs?
No, you're right. You know, I'm like you. I just saw the news, which just break seconds ago. We have learned to wait until we see the executive order. But one thing I would say from the get-go, we cannot have uncertainty as the new certainty. We cannot work like that. You know, workers cannot work like that. Industry cannot work like that. The economy cannot work in cycles where things change by the day. What we need to restore is stability and predictability, and that's our message also to our U.S. counterpart. What we want is not just a pause, is a removal of the tariffs, because I would say the market have spoken, U.S. workers have spoken, union leaders in the United States have spoken, and captain of industries have spoken. They all say, listen, these tariffs are making the price of trucks in the United States more expensive. You may have seen new prices already in some states. I saw some news yesterday on Fox News talking about the price increase at the dealership. We've seen, obviously, price which will increase at the grocery store, the price of energy. So one thing I would say is that the fact that we had a firm Canadian response, and whether it's federal, provincial, all the premiers together, I think this is resonating now in the United States. And there's someone somewhere saying, hold on for a minute. These tariffs, you know, a tariff on Canada is a tax on American. And I think that kind of message is resonating throughout the United States.
So let me ask you more bluntly then. In principle, if the full threat of tariffs, and by the way, the president even referenced aluminum and steel next week, the reciprocal ones in April, plus whatever this delay means. Like, if the threat remains, in principle, are we going to abate on our response at all? Or is it your government's view that the pressure stays on with counter tariffs, for example, as long as the threat remains?
The pressure stays on. The Prime Minister has been clear on that. You know, the only way you can make that work is to keep the pressure, because I think that is the kind of language that has been understood. And I would say the work that's been done across the nation, by the provinces, by the federal government, is really resonating. You know, you've seen governors more and more speaking up. I was in touch this morning with representatives of the CEOs of what we call the Big Three in the United States, so GM, Ford, and Stellantis. They had meetings at the White House, and I say, listen, we're going to keep the pressure, because you know what? One thing you need to understand, we're always going to stand up for Canada, our workers, and our industry. And actually now, I think I've never seen that, at least in my life in government, where you see so much of that being played out also in the American media space, where people are now talking about tariffs and kind of wondering, you know, what is it about these tariffs? You know, how could it be good for America and American consumers, whilst the president is talking about affordability in his State of the Union address? talking about making life more affordable for Americans, talking about the golden age of America. At some stage, we need to make sure they understand that the only way to achieve that is to work with us. And the way to do that is to go back to a dialogue, to sit at a table, to have a process, to discuss the things in a rational way. We've done our fair share when it comes to the border, whether it's about fentanyl, illegal immigration, and we're willing to engage with them. But it needs to be in a respectful manner and in one which is based on facts. And that's the work we've been doing over the last few weeks.
Yeah, I believe the Prime Minister called the border justification a bogus argument this week. And with respect to the auto sector, what Donald Trump did kind of make clear was that this is a big part of his plan as well. On the afternoon a few days ago, I remember very clearly when he was saying there's no room left for negotiation with Canada and Mexico, he specifically singled out the auto sector and said the way to avoid tariffs is for those companies to take their plants from Canada and move them to the United States, something his vice president has doubled down on as well. When you are in those conversations, as you said you had today with the representatives of those big auto companies, are they providing you with any assurances that they're going to stay in Canada? And what is your plan to ensure that is the case? Because the pressure is now on them to move south too.
Well, listen, everyone understand there is the rhetoric and there is the industrial reality. We've been making cars together for decades. The part industry is on both sides of the border. The plants are on both sides of the border. Why? Because Canada is a very competitive place to be. We have the best workers in order to make these cars, and we have an integrated supply chain. We kept repeating to them, you cannot talk about tariffs in the auto sector, among others, because the parts move 6 to 7 times across the border. That would not make sense. So I was very clear with them today. I said, you bet we're going to fight for these plants and these mandates in Canada. We've been doing cars for decades. And by the way, you have a surplus when it comes to the auto industry. So don't talk to me about this imbalance in trade. You do have a surplus in the United States. And there's a reason why we have integrated the supply chain. I always say the Americans don't buy from Canada to be polite. They buy what they need. And industry has been building on both sides of the border. You have the part manufacturers. They have assets on both sides. They have workers on both sides. And that is making North America more competitive. I would refer to what Premier Ford said recently. We want to do more together. We want to be more competitive. Canada has never been part of the problem. We're part of the solution. China is the problem. Let's work together. Let's make sure, as some have suggested, that we make sure that we have an integrated approach to make sure that, no one allows these cheap Chinese products to come on our shore and displace our workers and our industry. That's really what we need to do together. And let's stop picking on each other, because that really doesn't make sense from an industrial-based perspective. And you know what? It's not just us who say that now. It's American CEOs. You've heard the CEO of Ford, the CEO of Alcoa, CEO of Ford talk about cost and chaos. Those are not small words coming from one of the largest manufacturers in North America. So, I think the message, the Team Canada work, engaging with governors, with leaders in the United States is really working. And the fact that we're bringing our message to the American people is also playing out, because the more I see, American people don't understand why you would want to impose tariff on Canada whilst it's going to make their lives more expensive.
And I do, Minister, understand that economic argument, particularly around, something like dismantling the auto industry is not something that could ever happen overnight. My understanding is those CEOs made that case as well. But we reached out to the companies to say, what's your response to this pressure that the president is applying for you to move eventually even, or work to move your manufacturing from Canada to the United States? And none of them came back to us and said we would never do that. My question to you was, have they explicitly assured you that they don't plan on doing that? And what is the specific plan to ensure that they don't?
Well, they know that we would get after them. And we've been saying very clearly, the Canadian people have been very good to the auto sector for decades. We've been there in tough times to support them. And I reminded them that, they have commitments to Canada. We have the Auto Pact. This has been working well for decades. And by the way, we make things together. We have everything in Canada to be integrated in this North American auto market. And I've been very firm with them this morning, and I'm talking also to the union. We're going to be very, very, very firm. We're going to be fighting to keep these plants in Canada. We're going to keep fighting for the workers. And by the way, they have billions in assets in Canada. So to your point, You know, no one is suggesting that you move any of these plants with a truck and 3 movers. Those are big assets. They are in Canada because we know how to make cars. And the point we're making is that don't ever think about touching the Canadian plants because we're going to be there to support, to fight for our workers and to fight for our industry. And some of them have commitments towards the government of Canada for many, many years to come. So trust me, we're looking at everything. We're working with union leaders. We're talking to the auto company. And this morning I've been very clear that you know, we're going to be looking at that at every step of the way. That's why I say this 30-day may sound like good news today, but let's be very cautious.
Right.
Let's be very careful. Let's be very firm, because what we want is not it's not a suspension, it's a removal of these tariffs and getting back to something that makes sense, which is stability and predictability. You can run an economy like that. You can run an industry like that. And it's not just me saying that. It's U.S. CEOs and Canadian CEOs who say, listen, we need more predictability. You know, we need to know the rules of the game. When we know the rules, we'll all adapt. And we have the USMCA negotiated by the president. If they want to sit down with us and look at that, we are prepared to do that. But for now, what we need is to move away from this uncertainty, which is damaging on both sides of the border.
Just very, very quickly, final question. You just said you are willing to do that. Does that mean that if the president wants to start renegotiations on USMCA tomorrow, your government would be willing? And again, where the autos are concerned, you've put a lot of taxpayer money into this industry. If you need to put more, or if they demand more in order to stay, in principle, you know, are you willing or not willing to spend more Canadian taxpayer dollars?
But what I'm going to make sure is that first they respect their side of the bargain. I don't need to put more money on the table. The question is they have commitments to the Canadian people, and we're going to insist that they respect the intent and the letter of each of those agreements, and we've already starting that. I don't want to go there, by the way. What I want to say is that, okay, let's look at further investments. We've already created a space where we attracted record level of investments in Canada. And I can tell you, when I talk, for example, to the people in the aluminum sector, into the steel sector, their investment horizon is usually 10 to 20 years. No one is talking about changing anything in the short term. And our job with our workers is going to be to demonstrate to them that the best place to do business is in Canada. We have the workers, we have the energy, we have the integrated supply chain, and we're going to fight at every step of the way. Trust me on that. Vashi, you know, this is fundamental for us, and that's why we're taking such a firm position today.
I'll leave it on that note. Minister, thank you for your time as always.
Thank you very much. Talk to you soon.